Hi, I'm Dan from Nulty, Nulty Lighting, and I'm here to talk to you today about a topic called innovation or implementation. I think it's something that's quite important in our industry to really sort of get to the bottom of how we design within our profession. So here we are, Nulty, and innovation or interpretation. So I think really it's really getting to the point of this is really to come to the sort of the nub of what it is we do and where we're called into projects. And as we all know, there's no two projects that are the same, and as such, there are no two processes that are the same, but ultimately our goal is the same, which is to always make something that's unique and profound and different and wonderful as a creative and as an artist. So how we do that, I mean, normally within our sector, you can take small steps into the standards or using the standards to go forward, or you can try and do something different and try and do something which is a departure from the norm and try to do something quite elaborate and profound. So our role is to create wonderful spaces, some place where you like to be and celebrate, reinforce the sort of architecture and the form and make it of wonder, play with the form, enhance it more, draw the eye through the space, define textures and form, also provide adequate illumination to make sure there's enough space for whatever task or whatever the space is meant to, the environment's meant to perform like. Reduce energy, something that's ever pressing and always more and more important. This one plays a key part really in sort of design nowadays because it really is having a much tighter sort of stranglehold on the designer and opportunities available to us. We also like to add value. You know, this is a project that was worked on by some of the team a long time ago. It's a car park, but it's just every now and again a little accent, a little touch can just bring something new to it. So something quite plain can become something quite splendid. We encourage interaction between people within environments. We also like to create experiences. However, and this is the main point, there are lots of rules that we have to use in the process of doing this alongside our duty. And those rules come in the form of regulations, they come in the form of certifications, and they also come in the form of aspirations. Now, predominantly, as a designer, as a creative, I like to think that I focus more on the aspiration of a space, how the space looks. But that comes across from a client in different ways sometimes. So we know that the must-haves, the things that we have to do by law, are things like sort of British standards, health and safety rules, Part L, WE directives. These are things we must adhere to and must stick by, governed by law. Then you've got certifications. Now, most projects, especially the larger ones, well, pretty much all the larger ones, have certain things depending on where they are and who's running them. But you've got to conform to BREEAM, LEED standards, eco homes, and these are things that, in order to have sort of higher commercial value, project sort of managers and the developers want you to have, so they can sort of get the highest value for the scheme. And then you have the like-to-haves, and the like-to-haves come in the form of the guidelines, and I think this is really what's important, and it's the guidelines that determine how a space should be lit. I think it's important to stress they are guidelines, and quite often a big part of our role is a dialogue with a client, a re-education process to try and say to them, yes, these numbers are there, but it's in context of how you want to perceive the space, the finishes, the textures, that kind of thing. So you sometimes have to unpick a project at the beginning to try and get to the bottom of what's trying to be achieved. What's important really, that one, if I go back a slide, is brand standards. Brand standards play a heavy part in that sometimes. A brand has an idea of what they are, and sometimes that can rule until the end, and it doesn't actually take into account anything. It doesn't work with the interior design, doesn't work with the nature of the space, and you have to try and sort of say, you know, we need to appreciate what we're trying to do here. And if that means that 600 lux across everything is your brand standards, but yet you want something to be pronounced or you want to create a mood and drama, you can't have the two things. They don't sit hand in hand. And that's true of some of the other things too. That's true of the need to haves, the BREEAMs and the LEEDs. I mean, that runs all the way through them, but knowledge of that is important to make sure that the end result is something that we're all happy with. So most of the guidelines focus on elements with this space that we see here, surfaces. Surfaces sort of typically, especially in the UK, are about how many lux we receive on a surface. Whether or not that's a display, a feature light, the vertical surfaces, or the floor plane, it's normally measured in a surface. the quality of the material of that surface is important, and in order to get the balance or the cadence of visual awareness of the space correct, you need to make sure that you're looking at each of those surfaces in almost isolation, removing all the light from the space and making sure that when you appreciate that space, you're really looking at the balance of light in the space and what you want to behold. Because light is subjective. Light is something that all of us appreciate in a different way, not based on guidelines and lux levels. What is said to be a wonderfully lit surface is just a highly lit surface, isn't necessarily what makes it look best. And in that sense, it's very much a quality versus quantity tool. Quantity normally is how much light we have, but visual perception of a space typically is, by and way, about 80% of how bright we see a space is on the vertical surface. So that's kind of how you make a space feel light, not how much light you have all over the surfaces, tangential to the surface. So what we have there is quantitative. The quantity of light is something that's measured as a quantitative thing. And that's good because it makes a project safe, it makes it formulaic, it also makes it quite indifferent. If you design solely by guidelines alone, everything will look the same and it'd be quite banal. Qualitative lighting is something that you look at the quality of light in a space, it's something that celebrates a space, it's designed for the space, it makes a space unique, and also makes a space feel special. If you design simply by the guides, you get a set of principles where the guidelines are used so often it becomes a rule. It's something that quite a lot of contractors, I'm not going to name any names, but a lot of contractors design by, because it's quite easy to tickle the boxes and make sure that the space is lit well, everything's uniform, everything's flat and even, and there's no way to challenge it. So sticking to the guides is a nice way to get through all the hurdles. Especially in terms of luminous efficacy and efficiency and things like that. But after a while, it becomes practice, and everything becomes generic and the same. And in saying that, following the rules doesn't always create an emotional connection with the space, which goes back to the start, where we're trying to create spaces where people feel like they want to be in, feel celebrated, and feel loved. So I think the point really is, at the start of any project, when we could just look at those guidelines and take them and go, easy to spit this one out. I've used this fitting 1,000 times. I know what I'm going to do to get this light level on the surface. It's tried and tested. And I know the wider design team, the mechanical engineers, everyone else is going to think, great, I know that fitting and how to use it. It's wonderful. That detail is something I've been using for the last 25 years. You should always challenge it. So I think knowing the standards is important, but always it's harder work, but at the beginning, pick it apart and work out what you're trying to do, deconstruct it. What works can go back in, but the things that you think may be changed or can be shaken up, have a look at it and do it a different way. Which brings us on to the innovation part. How do we do that? So you've got leaps here. I think the leap from a tadpole to a frog is quite profound in its sense. That relies on the quantum tunneling of enzymes within the DNA to go from one form to another form. Quite miraculous. And that giant leap, that thing that you don't even know how it's been achieved, that evolution, is something I think that in design happens seldomly, but it is something that helps enforce design and take it forward. I've looked at 3 different ways. I'm trying to summarize it. So you've got expression, when you're trying to say you've got a message you're trying to get out. You've got application, which is when you've just got a new set of tools. And you've got necessity, and that's sometimes when you just need to find a new solution. For expression, you've got people who play with the emotions. So we all know James Turrell's very good. I don't think he focuses so much on uniformity within the space, but he very much tackles the emotional engagement you have with the space and the way that your mind and psychology interprets color and light. It's not strictly the best way to light a space, but it creates a space that's full of wonder and splendor, and I don't think anyone would say, I'm not getting 300 lux on this work plane. It's about how you feel in a space. Obviously, he's a light artist. He can get away with it. I'm not saying that's how we do every reception space. But the Gainsville effect is a science that is quite spectacular. James Carpenter, looking at daylight and how you celebrate daylight in a space. The light is traveling through the space. It's passing through a medium. How do you catch it? How do you enhance it? And how do you make it something you think is a wonderful form? The light's already there. It's just it's a case of the daylight catching, harvesting it, and making it say something different and splendid. How you get daylight through a light well, how do you pull that daylight through, and how do you make it feel as though it's been considered and it's something of decadence. Then you've got people like the collaboration with Richard Rogers and Renzo Piano, who literally sort of looked at how a building typically is done and thought, okay, we're going to turn it inside out and put everything on the outside and the inside. And I think it's these, whether or not you like it or not, it's these sort of jumps in approach or methodology where someone's taking a problem or a traditional method, made it a problem, and sort of come at it from a different angle. And I think that's important of all things. At the very start of a project, the best designs are when you really pick apart what you're trying to do, what is the space, not just taking the brief, but understand the deeper understanding, the underpinning of what could be achieved with that space, whether it's people's emotions within it, as well as the light fittings you use as a product. Here we go, and I think if I go, it's not turning the page, so I don't know, hang on. Okay, here we go. Buckminster Fuller was a guy that summarizes this quite well, because he's a gentleman who was a philosopher, he was a systems theorist, but he was also a mathematician, and his approach to architecture sort of back in the 30s was quite revolutionary, because he didn't look at structures and forms in the same way as a traditional classically trained architect did. He looked at forms in terms of minimalization and removing everything and making it the bare minimum that it can be, which led him to create structures such as the US Pavilion for the Expo in '67. Fantastic spherical form, very lightweight, high volume, low surface area, a fantastic space. And I think sort of he held a patent for that sort of geodesic nature of the dome there. But it almost took sort of architects retrospectively had to unlearn what they had learned classically to sort of learn his approach to form, function, space, materials. I think he summarized it by saying once that he challenged people who were sort of designing the high rises of New York back in the 30s at convention, how much their building weighed, and no one had an answer to how much their building weighed, and he sort of found it quite profoundly confusing how any other structure, whether it be a plane or a car, the weight of the materials had intrinsic sort of relevance to the property of the building, and in buildings it didn't typically. So he looks at it from a different angle. I think that change in perception is something that's quite key here. Always reassess it, try and turn around as much as you can and look at it from different points of view. We all get set in our ways, and we always look at it from one stance. Abercrombie and Fitch are someone who, whether or not you like the store, you know, it's sort of been and gone in terms of fashion now. But going back to Buckminster's quote here, you know, you can do more and more with less and less until eventually you can do everything with nothing. And I think that's relevant, really. Case study here for lighting designers in Abercrombie, because normally retail went in such a way that everything got brighter and brighter and brighter. And I think really Abercrombie and Fitch sort of hit the nexus of that sort of the change in consumerism when everything moved online and the high street sort of became more about the brand. And I think almost, I don't know whether it was by sort of desire or design, but Abercrombie already sort of had a very strong brand identity. That store experience was about the store. It wasn't about just getting as much light on the product as it can. So it became immersive. And I think that sort of is a way to sort of remove all the things you would normally do and just put in what's needed. I personally like looking at that for any space or any project, outdoors or indoors. Take everything away and only put in what's needed and add it, just, you know, bit of paint by bit of paint until you've got the overall picture, not just flood it with light and then take bits out or something like that. Application. So application is sort of is important. And I'm going to start this by talking a little sort of story about Wolfgang von Kempelen, and I probably haven't pronounced that right. But basically, between 1770 and 1854, he had this automata called the chess-playing Turk. Now, the chess-playing Turk, in this sort of day of enlightenment, was a machine that could apparently beat anyone at chess. And it went around, toured Europe and North America, or both Americas, and it took on the great minds of the time, and it baffled them because it beat great chess masters. People could open up the doors and look inside and see machinery and all this wonderful stuff's happening in the Age of Enlightenment, so people just sort of bought into the wonder of it, and it was a novelty item you go and pay and see and behold. It even sort of beat Napoleon in 1809 at chess, and there are various reports about how well it went down. Some say that he was, you know, thought it was funny, some say that he was outraged. But what really happened, and what's important about this, is that the actual machine itself, Edmund Cartwright in 1784 saw it in London. And that afterwards, he thought, if a machine can beat someone at playing chess, if something so amazing could be done there, then why can't I automate the process of weaving, which led to, at the very beginning of the Industrial Revolution, the first power looms, which sort of formed that. So he took that one idea, that one left field experience that wasn't what he sort of went to see the chess playing Turk for, but it engaged with some part of his mind that took him away from that and thought, I can look at this and reinterpret this mundane industrial process in a new way, and it challenged his thought process. Now, the irony being, the chess-playing Turk was a massive, elaborate hoax. It went on for 70 years or so, and it was really a complex series of doors where a chess master was located inside, moving around, and you could keep opening doors and see a machine, but actually it was a person. So it was flawed, but it triggered something in someone's mind and made them have an alternative stance. Throughout the years, lighting has come through many incarnations leading us to where we are today. Up today, we've got OLEDs and things like that, and this application has meant we can do wonderful things. This is the new integrated ceiling system at Bloomberg. Tiny little point sources. Obviously, they don't need to be heat sinked in the same way as incandescent sources, but an integrated ceiling system can be something of splendor. OLED could create wonderful forms. BMW, for instance, are using OLEDs in different ways to create lovely light forms and things of beauty almost within the automotive industry, which is kind of pushing the front of OLED design. Fresnel looked at reducing the material used in the the convex lens and reduced it down to Fresnel lens, which radically sort of changed how you could enhance how much light you have from a source. Updating that today with the modern day, its contemporary counterpart, lens vector, have got using optical wavefronts and electro fields to distort and change beam widths within a medium, but which takes us to a sort of a summary quote by Buckminster saying, "You never change things by fighting existing reality. To change something, build a new model that makes the existing model obsolete." So it's don't keep using the tried and tested. Always interrogate. Necessity. Necessity is the one that's hard to define because lots of things in necessity happen because something's already out there you can reinterpret. Maybe polymers, you can sort of make a new plastic based on the things you know about its chemical attributes, but sometimes things are a fortune with necessity, and you can reuse it and implement it in a different way. For instance, LED, looking at, you need to use LEDs in space to grow plants. We're going to sort of spend any amount of time in space getting a sustainable crop of plants, for instance, in there, using low energy sources. Maybe that's a necessity there. The Steadicam was sort of developed for films like The Shining because they wanted that moment of the soft panning around. I think that kid's called Daniel as well. So yeah, it wasn't me. I moisturized. Or the people's innate relationship with daylight and trying to get daylight into a space. Colux, we all know, did this very well with the Rayleigh scattering effect that they have with the Colux sun and the Colux moon. So it's bringing daylight into an artificial space in a way that you feel is quite emotional. How does it apply to us? Well, in our process, we come on, designed by standards, would make a very flat horizontal scheme. Everything would look the same and mundane. Lighting designers come in, we try at the concept stage, raise the bar, we come up with loads of outlandish ideas about things that could and couldn't be achieved. Normally, budget, program, engineering, and predictability, people like the known and tested, end up whittling it down. But we hope by the end of it, the aspiration of the project has been raised slightly higher. And I think that's our important role as a lighting designer or as an artist. That has a huge part of risk attached to it. That's why people don't like that clients, you've normally got a higher effort trying to communicate that because the risk involved takes energy, sometimes money, it's unknown. But what would happen without risk? Without taking that risk, you would end up with every house looking like this, every bit of architectural form. It serves its purpose, but it's not the most wonderful or spectacular to look at. Corbusier, a great leading forerunner in just looking at spaces, forms, light, how that space behaves with light, how that form should or shouldn't be, deconstructing it and making these wonderful shapes, wonderful edges, wonderful lines, wonderful daylight coming into the space. That wouldn't happen if you did it the most efficient or effective way. That's to always look at and reinterpret the problem. Unfortunately, he is no longer with us, but there he is, the man himself. I'm going to end on a quote by Nietzsche, and it says, "You have your way, I have my way. As for the right way, the correct way, and the only way, it does not exist." So always, there's no such thing as a correct way. Everything's a unique situation, everything's a unique problem. Therefore, at the beginning, step back, step out. I know you've been told what you need to do, but do your own take on it and try and make sure that it's something you can be proud of at the end. That's it.